The woman who rode into Benton, Montana territory on that scorching July afternoon in 1878 looked like she had been dragged through hell and barely made it out breathing. Zachary Pierce watched from the porch of his ranch house as her horse stumbled up the long dirt path, the animal as exhausted as its rider, both covered in dust that had baked onto their skin like clay. He set down the leather he had been working and stood, one hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip, before he realized the approaching figure posed no threat. She was slumped forward in the saddle, her dark hair hanging in tangled ropes around her face, and even from a distance, he could see the way she favored her left side. Zachary was 32 years old and had been alone on this ranch for the better part of 5 years, ever since his parents had passed from fever within days of each other. He had grown accustomed to silence, to the company of cattle and horses, to conversations with his ranch hands that never went deeper than discussing the weather or the state of the fences. He had built walls around himself as sturdy as the barn that housed his livestock, and he had convinced himself he preferred it that way. But something about the sight of this woman, barely holding herself upright, sent a crack through those walls before she even spoke a word. He walked down the steps as she pulled her horse to a stop in front of the house. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had first thought, maybe 25 or 26, with eyes the color of storm clouds and skin that had been sun-darkened by long days of riding. But it was the scars that made him pause, made his breath catch in his chest. They traced down the left side of her face, thin white lines that spoke of something sharp and deliberate, disappearing beneath the collar of her worn shirt. More scars marked her hands where they gripped the reins, and he suspected there were others hidden beneath her dusty clothes. "Water," she said, her voice rough and cracked. "Please." Zachary did not ask questions. He simply nodded and reached up to help her down from the horse. She flinched when his hands touched her waist, but she was too weak to resist, and he lowered her gently to the ground. Her legs nearly buckled, and he steadied her with one arm while calling out toward the barn. "Tommy, see to this horse." A young ranch hand appeared, eyes widening at the sight of the woman, but Zachary shot him a look that said not a word, and Tommy quickly led the exhausted animal away. Zachary guided the woman up the porch steps and into the house, settling her into the chair by the kitchen table. He pumped water from the well into a tin cup and handed it to her, watching as she drank it down so fast she choked, coughing and sputtering. "Slower," he said gently, refilling the cup. "You will make yourself sick." She nodded, taking smaller sips this time, and he could see her hands shaking as she held the cup. He went to the cupboard and pulled out some bread and cold beef from the previous night's supper, setting it on the table in front of her. She stared at the food like she could not quite believe it was real, and then she looked up at him with those storm-gray eyes. "I can work," she said. "I can earn my keep. I am good with horses and I can cook and clean. I just need somewhere to stay for a while." Zachary pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, studying her face. The scars were not fresh, he could see that now. They had healed over, leaving their permanent mark, but whatever had caused them had happened months ago, maybe longer. He wanted to ask what had happened, wanted to know who had hurt her and why she was running, but something in her eyes told him she would not answer. She had the look of a wounded animal, ready to bolt at the slightest sign of threat. "What is your name?" he asked instead. She hesitated as if even that simple question was dangerous. "Willa," she finally said. "Willa Warren. I am Zachary Pierce. This is my ranch. I run about 200 head of cattle and I have 3 men who work for me." He gestured toward the food. "Eat first. We can talk about work after you have rested." Willa picked up the bread with trembling fingers and took a small bite, chewing slowly. He could see tears gathering in her eyes, though whether from relief or something else, he could not tell. She ate mechanically, as if she had forgotten how to taste food, and he rose to give her privacy, busying himself with stoking the fire in the stove even though the day was hot. "There is a room upstairs," he said, keeping his back to her. "It was my sister's before she married and moved to Billings. You can stay there as long as you need." "I can work," Willa repeated, and there was desperation in her voice now. "I will not take charity." Zachary turned to face her. "Then you will work, but first you will rest. You look like you have been riding for days without stopping." "Weeks," she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. "I have been riding for weeks." He nodded, not asking where she had come from or what she was running from. "The room is at the top of the stairs, second door on the right. There is a basin and clean water for washing. I will have Tommy bring up some of my sister's old clothes. They should fit you well enough." Willa finished the bread and beef, draining another cup of water before she stood on shaky legs. "Thank you," she said, and the words sounded rusty, like she had not used them in a long time. Zachary watched her make her way slowly up the stairs, one hand gripping the railing tightly, and he wondered what kind of hell she had endured to end up here, alone and scarred, asking a stranger for shelter. He had seen a lot of hard things in his 32 years, had lived through the tail end of the war even though he had been too young to fight, had watched people suffer and die from violence and disease and simple bad luck. But there was something about Willa Warren that got under his skin, made him want to stand between her and whatever demons were chasing her. He went outside to find Tommy brushing down Willa's horse, and the animal was in better shape than he had first thought, just tired and thirsty. "She is staying on for a while," Zachary said. "To help around the ranch. I want you to keep your mouth shut about it and make sure the other men do the same. No gossip, no questions. Understood?" Tommy nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, Mr. Pierce, I will tell them." "Good, and Tommy, treat her with respect or you will answer to me." The young man's eyes widened. "Of course, sir. I would never, I know," Zachary said, softening his tone. "Just making sure we are clear." He walked back to the house, his mind turning over the mystery of Willa Warren. He had meant what he said about not asking questions. A person's past was their own business, and if she wanted to tell him what had happened to her, she would do so in her own time. But he could not deny the pull he felt toward her, the need to protect her that had flared up the moment he saw her slumped in that saddle. It was a feeling he had not experienced in years, not since before his parents died and he had closed himself off from the world. The afternoon wore on, the sun beating down mercilessly on the dry Montana landscape. Zachary went about his usual tasks, checking on the cattle in the near pasture, inspecting the new fence line that the men had been working on all week, making notes about supplies they would need to pick up when he made his next trip into town. But his mind kept drifting back to the house, to the woman sleeping upstairs, and he found himself listening for any sound that might indicate she needed help. As evening approached and the heat finally began to break, he returned to the house to start preparing supper. He was halfway through peeling potatoes when he heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Willa descending, wearing one of his sister's old dresses. It was faded blue calico, simple and practical, and it fit her reasonably well, though she had lost enough weight that it hung loose around her frame. She had washed her face and hands, and her dark hair was still damp, hanging in waves down her back. The scars were more visible now without the dust covering them, but Zachary kept his expression neutral, his gaze meeting hers without flinching or staring. "You should have rested longer," he said. "I slept enough," Willa replied, though the shadows under her eyes suggested otherwise. "Let me help with supper." Zachary hesitated, then handed her the knife and the half-peeled potato. "Do you know how to make biscuits?" "Yes," she said, and there was the faintest hint of relief in her voice, as if she was grateful to have something useful to do. They worked in companionable silence, moving around the kitchen with the ease of people who were both accustomed to taking care of themselves. Willa's hands were deft and skilled, and she made the biscuits with practiced efficiency, mixing the flour and lard and milk without measuring, going by feel and experience. Zachary fried up salt pork and beans, and by the time the sun was setting, they had a simple but filling meal ready. "The men eat in the bunkhouse," Zachary explained as he set the table. "They take care of their own meals usually, but you and I will eat here." Willa sat down across from him, and he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. He served her a generous portion, noting how thin she was beneath the loose dress, and they began to eat. The biscuits were excellent, light and flaky, and he told her so. "My mother taught me," Willa said quietly. Before she stopped abruptly, her jaw tightening, and Zachary did not push. "Well, she taught you well," he said simply, and left it at that. After supper, Willa insisted on washing the dishes while Zachary sat at the table, writing out the list of supplies he would need from town. The domesticity of the scene struck him as strange after so many years of eating alone, of washing his own dishes and going to bed in a silent house. But it was not an unwelcome strangeness. There was something comforting about the sound of water splashing, the clink of tin plates being stacked, the presence of another person sharing the space. "I will need to go into Benton tomorrow," he said as she dried the last plate, "to pick up supplies and check on a few things. You can come along if you like, or you can stay here and rest." Willa's hand stilled, and he saw fear flash across her face. "I would rather stay here if that is all right." "That is fine," Zachary said, keeping his tone easy. "Tommy and the other men will be around if you need anything, but they will be out working the cattle for most of the day." She nodded, visibly relaxing. "Thank you. You keep saying that," he observed gently. "You do not have to thank me for every little thing, Willa." "I do, though," she said, meeting his eyes. "You took me in without asking anything of me. You have no idea who I am or where I came from or what I have done. Most people would not do that." Zachary leaned back in his chair, studying her in the lamplight. "Most people are too concerned with other people's business. I figure everyone has a right to their own story, and they can share it or not as they please." "Even if that story is ugly?" Willa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Especially then," he said firmly. "Whatever happened to you, it does not change the fact that you showed up here needing help, and I have the means to provide it. That is all that matters to me." Willa looked away, but not before he saw the tears welling up in her eyes again. She brushed them away quickly, as if ashamed of showing emotion. "I should turn in," she said. "It has been a long day, of course. Sleep as late as you need. There is no rush tomorrow." She nodded and moved toward the stairs, then paused with her hand on the railing. "Zachary." "Yes." "Why are you being so kind to me?" He considered the question, searching for an honest answer. "I suppose because I know what it is like to be alone," he said finally, "and because something tells me you have had enough unkindness to last a lifetime." Willa did not respond, but he saw her shoulders shake slightly, and then she hurried up the stairs, leaving him alone in the kitchen with the dying lamplight and his own thoughts. That night, Zachary lay in his bed and listened to the sounds of the house, so familiar, and yet altered by the presence of another person. He heard floorboards creak overhead, heard the soft sound of crying that she tried to muffle, and his chest ached with a protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. He barely knew this woman, And yet he was already invested in her well-being, already planning ways to help her heal whatever wounds she carried, both visible and invisible. The next morning, he woke before dawn as always and went downstairs to find Willa already in the kitchen, stoking the fire in the stove. She looked up guiltily as he entered. "I hope I did not wake you," she said. "I wanted to make coffee and breakfast before you left for town." "You did not wake me," Zachary assured her, "but you did not have to do this." "I want to," Willa said firmly. "You said I could work to earn my keep. Let me start with this." He nodded, not wanting to argue, and went to wash up at the basin. By the time he returned, she had coffee brewing and was frying eggs and the last of the salt pork. They ate together as the sun began to rise, painting the Montana sky in shades of pink and gold, and Zachary found himself reluctant to leave, even though he had been making this trip to town once a week for years. "I should be back by late afternoon," he said as he stood and grabbed his hat. "Help yourself to anything in the kitchen. There are books in the sitting room if you want something to read, and if you need anything, just holler for Tommy." "I will be fine," Willa said, though her fingers were twisting nervously in the fabric of her skirt. Zachary paused at the door, then turned back. "No one is going to hurt you here, Willa. You are safe on this ranch. I give you my word." She looked up at him, those storm-gray eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether she could trust his promise. "I believe you," she said finally, and he hoped she meant it. The ride into Benton took about an hour, and Zachary used the time to think about the situation he had found himself in. Taking in a strange woman with no explanation would raise eyebrows in town, and he knew there would be questions, gossip that would spread like wildfire through the small community. But he found that he did not care. Let people talk. Willa needed help, and he was in a position to provide it, and that was all that mattered. Benton was a growing town, bustling with activity as ranchers and miners and merchants went about their business. Zachary hitched his horse outside the general store and went in to place his order, exchanging pleasantries with the owner, a portly man named Silas who loved to talk. "Heard you have someone new out at your place," Silas said casually as he measured out flour. "Tommy mentioned it when he was in here yesterday." Zachary kept his expression neutral. "I hired some help, yes, a woman who knows horses and can cook." "A woman, huh?" Silas raised his eyebrows. "That is unusual." "Is it?" Zachary met the man's gaze steadily. "I need help around the ranch and she needed work. Seems like a fair arrangement to me." Sure, Silas said, backing down under Zachary's level stare. No offense meant, just making conversation. Zachary collected his supplies and loaded them into his wagon, then stopped by the land office to check on some paperwork regarding his grazing rights. He ran into a few acquaintances who made similar comments or asked probing questions, and each time he deflected with the same simple explanation. She was a hired hand, nothing more, nothing less. What business was it of theirs? By the time he started back toward the ranch, the sun was high overhead and the heat was oppressive. He found himself urging the horses faster, eager to get back, to make sure Willa was all right. It was foolish, probably. She was a grown woman who had clearly survived worse than being alone on a ranch for a few hours. But still, he worried. When he pulled up to the house, he immediately noticed something different. The porch had been swept clean, and there were curtains in the kitchen window that he did not remember hanging this morning. He climbed down from the wagon and walked inside to find the entire downstairs transformed. The floors had been scrubbed, the windows cleaned until they sparkled, and there was fresh bread cooling on the counter, filling the house with its warm, yeasty scent. Willa appeared from the sitting room, a rag in her hand and dust on her cheek. "You are back," she said, and he could hear both relief and satisfaction in her voice. "You have been busy," Zachary said, looking around in amazement. The house had not been this clean since his mother was alive. "I needed something to do," Willa said, brushing the dust from her hands. "I hope you do not mind. I found the curtains in a trunk upstairs and I thought they might brighten the place up." "I do not mind at all," Zachary said. "It looks wonderful, but you should not have worked so hard. You still need to rest and recover." "Working helps," Willa said quietly. "It keeps my mind occupied." Zachary understood that sentiment. He had thrown himself into work after his parents died, using physical exhaustion to keep the grief at bay. "Well, let me at least help you with supper tonight. It is not fair for you to do all the cooking." They prepared the evening meal together, and Zachary was struck again by how natural it felt, how easily they moved around each other in the small kitchen. Willa was starting to relax slightly, he noticed. The rigid tension in her shoulders had eased a fraction, and she did not flinch quite as much when he moved near her. It was progress, small but significant. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Zachary went about his work on the ranch, and Willa took over the cooking and cleaning, transforming the house into a home again. She also proved true to her word about being good with horses. He watched one afternoon as she worked with a young gelding that had been giving the men trouble, her hands gentle but firm, her voice low and soothing. The horse calmed under her touch in a way it never had for anyone else, and Zachary found himself mesmerized by the sight. "You have a gift," he said when she finally led the now docile horse back to the barn. Willa smiled slightly, the first real smile he had seen from her. "Animals are easier than people. They do not judge or demand explanations." "No, they do not," Zachary agreed, leaning against the fence rail. "Though I like to think people can learn to be better about that too." She glanced at him, something soft in her expression. "Some people, maybe." As the days turned into weeks, Zachary found himself looking forward to the end of the workday, to returning to the house and finding Willa there, to sharing meals and quiet conversation. She began to talk more, sharing small pieces of herself. She had grown up on a farm in Kansas, she told him. She had 2 brothers, both older, both gone now. Her mother had died when she was 16, and her father had remarried quickly to a woman Willa did not get along with, but she never mentioned the scars and Zachary never asked. He noticed other things, though. The way she tensed when voices were raised, even in laughter. The way she positioned herself near exits, always aware of escape routes. The nightmares that woke her several times a week, her screams muffled but audible through the walls. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her she was safe, but he did not want to overstep. So instead, he made sure she knew he was there if she needed him, and he gave her space to heal at her own pace. One evening in late August, they were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the mountains. The air had finally cooled, bringing relief after another scorching day, and Zachary was whittling a piece of wood while Willa mended one of his shirts. It was peaceful, companionable, and he realized with a start that he had not been this content in years. "Zachary," Willa said suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Why did you never marry?" He looked up from his whittling, surprised by the question. "I suppose I never found the right person," he said slowly. "And after my parents died, I was too busy keeping the ranch going to think much about it. What about you?" Willa's hand stilled on the shirt, and for a moment he thought she would not answer. Then she said very quietly, "I was married once, briefly." Zachary's chest tightened, and he had a sudden, terrible suspicion about where those scars had come from. "What happened?" he asked gently. "He died," Willa said, and there was no grief in her voice, only a flat, hard tone that spoke of complicated feelings. "6 months ago. That is when I started riding." "I am sorry," Zachary said, though he was not entirely sure what he was sorry for. Sorry that she had lost her husband. Or sorry for whatever had happened before that loss. "Do not be," Willa said, looking at him directly. "I am not." There was a weight of meaning in those words, and Zachary understood without her having to say more. Her husband had been the one who hurt her, who left those scars on her skin and probably deeper ones on her soul. The man had died and she had run, putting as much distance as possible between herself and whatever life she had known. "You are safe here," Zachary said, the words inadequate but heartfelt. "No matter what happened before, you are safe now." Willa's eyes filled with tears, and this time she did not brush them away. "Why are you so good to me? You do not even know me, not really. I could be a terrible person. I could have done terrible things." "Have you?" Zachary asked. "No," she whispered, "but I thought about it. Toward the end, I thought about killing him just to make it stop." "That does not make you terrible," Zachary said firmly. "That makes you human." We all have dark thoughts when we are being hurt or threatened. What matters is what you actually do. "I waited for him to die," Willa said, the words spilling out now as if a dam had broken. "He got sick, some kind of fever, and I nursed him because that was what a wife was supposed to do. But inside, I was praying for it to take him. Does that make me evil?" "No," Zachary said, setting down his whittling and moving closer to her. "It makes you someone who was desperate to survive." Willa let out a sob, and then she was crying in earnest, her whole body shaking with the force of it. Zachary wanted to put his arms around her, to hold her and tell her everything would be all right, but he did not want to overstep, did not want to make her uncomfortable. So instead, he just sat close, his presence a silent offer of comfort, and let her cry until she was spent. When she finally quieted, wiping her face with the back of her hand, she looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I am sorry. I did not mean to fall apart like that." "You have nothing to apologize for," Zachary said gently. "You have been holding all of that inside for months. It needed to come out." "Thank you," Willa said, and this time when she said it, there was a depth of feeling that made Zachary's heart clench. "Thank you for not judging me. Thank you for not asking questions. Thank you for just letting me be here." "You do not have to keep thanking me," he said, echoing his words from weeks ago. But then he added, "Though I am grateful you are here. This place has felt like a home again since you arrived." Something shifted in Willa's expression, a softening, a tentative hope. "Really?" "Really," Zachary confirmed. "I did not realize how lonely I was until you showed up and reminded me what it was like to share space with someone." They sat in silence as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, bright and numerous in the clear Montana night. Zachary felt something settling into place inside him, a rightness that he had not known was missing. He was falling for this scarred, secretive woman, he realized. Had been falling for her since the moment she rode up to his ranch, desperate and hurting and still fighting to survive. The realization should have frightened him, but instead it filled him with a quiet certainty. He did not know where this was going, or if Willa felt anything for him beyond gratitude. But he knew he wanted to find out. He wanted to be there for her as she healed, wanted to show her that not all men were like the one who had hurt her, wanted to earn her trust and, eventually, her love. But he would not rush her. He would give her all the time she needed. Because if there was one thing Zachary Pierce had learned in his 32 years, it was that the best things were worth waiting for. September brought cooler weather and the beginning of preparations for winter. The cattle needed to be moved to lower pastures, and there were repairs to be made to the barn and outbuildings before the snow came. Zachary was busy from dawn until dusk, and Willa threw herself into helping however she could. She proved invaluable during the cattle drive. riding alongside the men with a skill that earned their respect. Even Tommy, who had been skeptical at first about a woman working on the ranch, admitted that she pulled her weight and then some. One afternoon, while they were mending fence together in a far pasture, Willa asked about his parents. Zachary found himself opening up in a way he rarely did, telling her about his mother's kindness, his father's quiet strength, the way they had built this ranch from nothing and made it thrive. He told her about their deaths, how sudden and devastating it had been, how he had felt adrift for months afterward. "But you kept going," Willa observed, hammering a nail into a fence post with practiced efficiency. "You did not give up." "What else could I do?" Zachary said. "The ranch needed tending. The cattle needed feeding. Life does not stop just because you are grieving." "No," Willa agreed quietly. "It does not." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and then Willa said, "I think you would have made your parents proud. The way you run this place, the way you treat your men, the way you treated me when I showed up here." Zachary felt warmth spread through his chest at her words. "Thank you, that means a lot." "I mean it," Willa insisted, meeting his eyes. "You are a good man, Zachary Pierce. Better than you probably realize." He wanted to tell her that she made him want to be good, that her presence in his life had awoken something he thought had died along with his parents. But the words stuck in his throat, feeling too big, too vulnerable, so he just nodded and returned to his work. That night, after supper, they sat together in the sitting room, Zachary reading a newspaper that was 2 weeks old and Willa working on embroidering pillowcases. It was a domestic scene that would have looked perfectly natural to any outside observer, and Zachary found himself imagining what it would be like if this was their life, if Willa was his wife and not just someone temporarily staying at his ranch. "What are you thinking about?" Willa asked, and he realized he had been staring at her. "Nothing," he said quickly, feeling heat rise in his face. This is nice, having company in the evenings." Willa smiled, and it transformed her face, making her look younger and lighter. "It is nice," she agreed. "I never thought I would feel comfortable around a man again, but you make it easy." "I am glad," Zachary said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. As October arrived and the leaves on the cottonwood trees turned gold, Zachary noticed that Willa had gained weight, filling out the dresses that had hung loose on her frame when she first arrived. The shadows under her eyes had faded, and she smiled more often, laughed at Tommy's terrible jokes, sang softly to herself while cooking. She was healing, he realized, and the thought filled him with profound satisfaction. One evening, while they were washing dishes together, Willa's hand brushed against his in the soapy water, and neither of them pulled away. Zachary's heart hammered in his chest as they stood there, hands touching, and when he looked at her, he saw color rising in her cheeks. "Willa," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, water dripping from her hands, her expression somewhere between hopeful and afraid. "What is it?" Zachary took a breath, gathering his courage. "These past few months, having you here, they have been the best months I have had in years. You have brought light back into this house, into my life. And I know you came here looking for safety, for a place to heal, and I do not want to ruin that or make you uncomfortable. But I also cannot keep pretending that I do not feel something for you." Willa's eyes widened, and for a moment she just stared at him. Then, very quietly, she said, "What do you feel?" "I think I am falling in love with you," Zachary admitted, his heart pounding. "Actually, no, I know I am. I have been falling for you since the day you rode up here, and every day since has just made it stronger." Tears filled Willa's eyes, but this time they did not look like tears of pain. "I am broken, Zachary. I have scars inside and out. I wake up screaming. Sometimes I flinch when you move too fast. Are you sure that is what you want?" "I want you," Zachary said firmly, reaching out to gently cup her scarred face in his hand. "All of you. The scars do not scare me, Willa. They are proof of what you survived, and that makes you stronger, not broken." "I never thought I would feel this way again," Willa whispered, leaning into his touch. "After everything that happened, I thought that part of me was dead, but being here with you, I feel it coming back to life. I feel myself coming back to life. Is that a yes?" Zachary asked, hardly daring to hope. "Do you have feelings for me too?" "Yes," Willa said, and then more firmly, "Yes, Zachary, I love you. I think I started loving you when you handed me that first cup of water and did not ask me any questions. When you just offered me kindness without demanding anything in return." Zachary let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, and then he leaned forward slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to. But she did not pull away. Instead, she rose up on her toes to meet him, and when their lips touched, it was gentle and sweet and perfect. They stood there in the kitchen, kissing softly while the dishwater grew cold and the lamps burned low, and Zachary thought his heart might burst from the joy of it. When they finally pulled apart, Willa was crying again, but she was smiling too, and he wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "I am going to spend every day for the rest of my life proving to you that love does not have to hurt," he promised. "That you deserve to be cherished and protected and adored." "I believe you," Willa said, and this time there was no hesitation in her voice. They spent the evening on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the October chill, talking about everything and nothing. Willa told him more about her childhood, the good parts this time, about learning to ride horses bareback and helping her mother bake pies for church socials. Zachary told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to expand the herd and maybe start breeding horses. They talked about the future in a way that assumed they would be sharing it, and it felt right, natural, like pieces of a puzzle sliding into place. As the weeks passed, their relationship deepened. They were careful with each other, both aware of Willa's trauma and determined not to rush things. But there were stolen kisses in the barn when no one was looking, hands held under the table during supper, long conversations that lasted late into the night. Zachary courted her properly, with wildflowers picked from the meadow and small gifts carved from wood during his spare moments. Willa responded with fresh baked pies and mended clothes and a smile that lit up the room. In November, the first snow came, dusting the mountains white and signaling the start of winter. Zachary and his men worked hard to make sure everything was ready, that the cattle had access to shelter and food, that the buildings were secure. Willa helped where she could, but mostly she focused on preparing the house, laying in supplies of preserved food and making sure they had enough firewood to last through the cold months. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Willa said, "I need to tell you something." "About what happened? About the scars?" Zachary looked at her, seeing the determination in her face. "You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to." "I know," Willa said, "but I want to. I need you to understand where I came from, what I survived." Zachary nodded, taking her hand in his. "I am listening." Willa took a deep breath, then began. "I married him when I was 19. His name was Robert Warren, and at first he seemed like a good man, hardworking, respectable. My stepmother pushed for the marriage because she wanted me out of the house, and I thought it was my chance to have a family of my own, to build the kind of life my mother would have wanted for me." She paused, staring into the fire, and Zachary squeezed her hand gently, encouraging her to continue. "But he changed after the wedding," Willa went on, her voice flat. "Or maybe he just stopped pretending. He was angry all the time, blamed me for everything that went wrong. If dinner was not ready on time, if the house was not clean enough, if I spoke to another man at church, everything was an excuse for his rage. He hit you," Zachary said, not a question but a statement. Yes, Willa confirmed. At first it was just slaps, hard enough to sting but not to mark. But it got worse. He would grab me by the throat, throw me against walls, kick me when I was down. I learned to walk on eggshells to anticipate his moods, but it never mattered. Nothing I did was ever good enough. Zachary felt rage burning in his chest, a fury so intense it nearly choked him. But he kept his expression calm, knowing that anger, even on her behalf, might upset her. How long did this go on? 6 years, Willa said, and Zachary's heart broke at the length of time she had endured such horror. 6 long years of walking around on eggshells, of being terrified in my own home. I tried to leave once, went to my father's house, but he sent me back. Said marriage was sacred, that it was my duty to stand by my husband, that I probably deserved whatever I was getting. Your father said that. Zachary could not keep the disgust out of his voice. He was not a kind man, Willa said simply, and my stepmother hated me. They were not going to help, so I went back and Robert was furious that I had tried to leave. That was when, she touched her face, tracing the scars. He came at me with a knife, said he was going to mark me so that everyone would know I belonged to him, so that no other man would ever want me. Zachary felt sick, imagining the terror she must have felt, the pain. Did anyone try to help you? We lived on a farm away from town, Willa said. The nearest neighbors were miles away. Even if they heard me screaming, they probably just ignored it. People do not like getting involved in domestic matters. What happened to him? Zachary asked. How did he die? Fever, like I said, Willa answered. It came on sudden in the early spring. I nursed him because I had nowhere else to go, no money, no way to survive on my own. But inside, I was counting down the days. When he finally died, I sold everything I could, packed what I needed, and started riding. I had some vague idea of reaching California, starting over somewhere no one knew me. But you ended up here instead, Zachary said. I ended up here, Willa agreed, looking at him with those storm-gray eyes. With you. And for the first time since I was 19 years old, I feel like I can breathe. Like I am a person and not just someone's property. Zachary pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her carefully, always mindful of her comfort. You are so much stronger than you know, he said against her hair. To survive all that and still have the courage to trust again, to open your heart again. You amaze me, Willa Warren. I want to change my name, Willa said suddenly, pulling back to look at him. I do not want to be Willa Warren anymore. That name reminds me of him, of those terrible years. What do you want to be called? Zachary asked. Willa smiled, and there was mischief in it, a lightness he had never seen before. I was thinking maybe Willa Pierce, if you would have me. Zachary's heart stopped, then started again, racing. Are you asking me to marry you? I suppose I am, Willa said, color rising in her cheeks. I know it is forward of me, and we have not been courting that long, but I know what I feel. I love you, Zachary. I want to spend my life with you. But I understand if you need more time, or if you want to wait. Yes, Zachary interrupted, grinning so wide his face hurt. Yes, I will marry you. I would marry you tomorrow if I could. Willa laughed, a sound of pure joy, and kissed him soundly. We should probably wait a little longer than tomorrow. Give people time to get used to the idea. But spring, maybe? A spring wedding. Spring sounds perfect, Zachary agreed, kissing her again. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about where the ceremony would be held, who they would invite, how they would combine their lives even more fully. It was decided that they would get married in late April, after the worst of the winter was over, but before the busiest season on the ranch. They would have a small ceremony, just a few friends and Zachary's sister from Billings, and then a simple celebration at the ranch. Word of their engagement spread through Benton faster than wildfire, and as Zachary had predicted, there was gossip. Some people said it was too soon, that they barely knew each other. Others whispered about Willa's past, about the scars on her face, speculating on where they had come from. But Zachary shut down any talk he heard, making it clear that his private life was none of their concern, and eventually, most people accepted it and moved on. His sister Martha arrived in December for a visit, and Zachary watched nervously as she met Willa for the first time. But Martha, who was as kind as their mother had been, took one look at Willa's nervous face and pulled her into a warm hug. "It is so good to meet you," Martha said sincerely. "My brother has been alone for too long. I am glad he found someone to share his life with." Willa relaxed under Martha's acceptance, and soon the two women were chatting like old friends. Martha stayed for a week, helping with Christmas preparations and getting to know her future sister-in-law. Before she left, she pulled Zachary aside. "She has been hurt badly," Martha said quietly, so Willa would not hear. "I can see it in her eyes in the way she carries herself, but I can also see how much she loves you and how much you love her. Take care of her, Zachary. She deserves all the happiness in the world." "I will," Zachary promised. "I will spend the rest of my life taking care of her." Christmas came, and Zachary gave Willa a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple gold band with a small sapphire. Willa cried when he slipped it on her finger and gave him a hand-knitted scarf in return, the stitches careful and even, made during the hours she spent sitting by the fire while he worked. It was the best Christmas Zachary could remember, full of warmth and love and the promise of a future together. Winter settled in hard, bringing snow that piled up to the windows and temperatures that dropped below zero. But inside the ranch house, it was warm and cozy. Zachary and Willa spent their evenings planning their future, talking about everything from how many children they wanted to what color to paint the bedroom. Willa continued to have nightmares sometimes, but they were less frequent now, and when she woke screaming, Zachary was there to hold her and remind her that she was safe. In February, they made the trip into Benton to meet with the circuit preacher and make arrangements for the wedding. The man was elderly, with kind eyes, and he did not ask any uncomfortable questions, just congratulated them and wished them well. They also stopped by the general store to order fabric for Willa's wedding dress, and she chose a simple white cotton with delicate blue flowers embroidered on it. "You are going to be the most beautiful bride Montana has ever seen," Zachary told her as they drove back to the ranch, and Willa laughed, snuggling close to him on the wagon seat despite the cold. As spring arrived and the snow began to melt, the ranch came back to life. Calves were born, the grass turned green, and wildflowers bloomed across the meadows. Zachary and Willa worked together to prepare for the wedding, cleaning the house from top to bottom, preparing food, getting everything ready for their guests. Martha arrived a week before the wedding, bringing her husband and 2 children, and the house was suddenly full of noise and laughter. Willa took to her nieces immediately, playing with them and telling them stories, and Zachary watched with a full heart, imagining what it would be like when they had children of their own. The night before the wedding, as tradition dictated, Willa stayed at Martha's hotel room in town while Zachary remained at the ranch. He found it strange to sleep alone after months of knowing she was just down the hall, and he spent most of the night awake, thinking about the life they were about to start together. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Zachary dressed in his best suit, which had been his father's and still fit him reasonably well, and rode into town with a nervousness he had never felt before. Not because he had doubts, but because this moment felt so significant, so life-changing. The ceremony was held in the small church on the edge of Benton, with Martha and her family, Tommy and the other ranch hands, and a few townspeople in attendance. Zachary stood at the altar, his hands clasped behind his back to keep them from shaking, and waited for Willa to appear. When she did, walking down the aisle on Martha's husband's arm since she had no father to give her away, Zachary's breath caught in his throat. She was radiant in her simple white dress, her dark hair pinned up with wildflowers woven through it, and her face glowing with happiness. The scars were still there, would always be there, but they did not diminish her beauty. If anything, they made her more beautiful, proof of her strength and survival. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other for better or worse, in sickness and health, until death parted them. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her gently, mindful of their audience, but pouring all his love and devotion into that single kiss. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, held in the ranch house with food and music and dancing. Zachary danced with his new wife, holding her close and thinking that he was the luckiest man alive. Willa was smiling so wide it looked like her face might split, and when she looked up at him, there was nothing but love and trust in her eyes. "Happy?" he asked her as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Willa answered, resting her head against his chest. "Thank you for loving me, for seeing past the scars and the damage and loving me anyway." "I do not love you anyway," Zachary corrected gently. "I love you because of who you are, all of you, including the scars. They are part of your story, and your story is part of what makes you who you are." Willa's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I love you so much, Zachary Pierce." "I love you too, Willa Pierce," he said, and the name sounded perfect, right, like it was always meant to be hers. That night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet again, they went upstairs together as husband and wife. Zachary was patient and gentle, always mindful of Willa's past trauma, and when she assured him that she was ready, that she trusted him completely, he made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to both their eyes. It was nothing like what she had known in her previous marriage. This was loving and mutual and beautiful, and afterward they lay tangled together, Willa's head on Zachary's chest, feeling complete. The months that followed were the happiest of both their lives. They fell into the rhythm of married life easily, working the ranch together during the day and sharing quiet evenings by the fire. Willa's nightmares became rare, and when they did occur, Zachary was always there to comfort her, to remind her that she was safe and loved. In July, Willa discovered she was pregnant, and Zachary thought his heart might burst from joy. He became even more protective of her, insisting she not overwork herself, making sure she had everything she needed. Willa laughed at his hovering but was secretly touched by his devotion. Their son was born the following March, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. They named him Samuel, after Zachary's father, and Zachary cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by the perfection of this tiny new life. "Look what we made," Willa said, exhausted but radiant as she watched her husband cradle their baby. "Look at our beautiful boy." "He is perfect," Zachary agreed, pressing a kiss to his son's forehead. "Just like his mother." Willa smiled, reaching out to touch Zachary's face. "We have come so far from that day I rode up to your ranch, have we not? I was so broken then, so sure I would never be whole again." "You were never broken," Zachary said firmly. "Hurt, yes, traumatized, certainly, but never broken. You have always been whole, Willa. You just needed time to remember that." "You helped me remember," Willa said softly. "You loved me without asking questions. You gave me space to heal. You showed me what real love looks like." They sat together in the fading light, a family now, complete and content. Zachary thought about the lonely man he had been before Willa arrived, living in a silent house with only his work to fill the days. That life seemed like a distant memory now, almost belonging to someone else entirely. Over the next few years, their family grew. A daughter arrived 2 years after Samuel, and they named her Grace, because Willa said that was what Zachary had shown her, grace and acceptance when she needed it most. Then another son, Jacob, who was quieter than his siblings but had his mother's way with animals. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Willa's skill with horses led them to start a breeding program that became well known throughout Montana territory, and people came from far and wide to buy their stock. Zachary expanded the cattle operation, and between the two enterprises, they built a comfortable life. Martha and her family visited often, and the two families grew close. Willa developed friendships with other women in town, though she was always selective about who she let into her life. Some people still whispered about her scars, but most had grown to respect and admire her for her strength and kindness. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Willa on a picnic to the meadow where he used to pick wildflowers during their courtship. The children were spending the day with Martha, who had come to visit, and it was rare for them to have time alone together. They spread a blanket under a cottonwood tree and ate the meal Willa had prepared, talking and laughing about everything and nothing. Afterward, they lay side by side, watching clouds drift across the blue Montana sky. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of continuing on to California?" Willa turned her head to look at him, her eyes soft with love. "Not for a single moment. This is where I was meant to be. With you. I thank God every day that you rode up to my ranch that afternoon," Zachary said, taking her hand and lacing their fingers together. "You changed my life, Willa. You brought light and love and laughter back into it. I was existing before you came. Now I am living." "We saved each other," Willa said simply. "I was running from my past and you were hiding from the future. We found each other at exactly the right time." Zachary rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at his wife. Even after 10 years, she still took his breath away. The scars had faded slightly with time but were still visible, a permanent reminder of what she had survived. But to Zachary, they were beautiful, proof of her incredible strength. "I love you," he said, the words as heartfelt as the first time he had spoken them. "I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you even more tomorrow." "And I love you," Willa replied, reaching up to touch his face. "My lonely rancher who loved me without asking questions. Who gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. Who showed me that love could be gentle and kind." They kissed there in the meadow, surrounded by wildflowers and birdsong, and Zachary thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had not always been easy. Willa still had hard days, times when the memories of her first marriage haunted her. But they faced those days together, and with each one that passed, she grew stronger, more confident in herself and their love. As the years continued to pass, their children grew. Samuel became a skilled rancher like his father, taking on more responsibilities as he got older. Grace developed her mother's love of horses and her father's business sense, keeping meticulous records of the breeding program. Jacob, true to his quiet nature, preferred working with the cattle, spending long days riding the range. When Zachary turned 50, Willa organized a surprise party at the ranch, inviting friends and family from all over Montana. As he looked around at the gathered crowd, at his children and grandchildren, yes, they already had grandchildren, Samuel having married young and started his own family, Zachary felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Quite a life you have built," Martha said, coming to stand beside him on the porch. She was older now, her hair gray, but her eyes still held the same kindness. "We built," Zachary corrected. "Willa and I together. I could not have done any of this without her." "She is good for you," Martha agreed. "Always has been. I am glad you found each other." Willa appeared then, weaving through the crowd to reach her husband. Even at 44, she was still beautiful, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with years of laughter and sun. The scars were barely noticeable now, just faint white lines that Zachary's eyes had long ago learned to look past. "Are you having a good time?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. "The best," Zachary assured her, kissing her temple. "Thank you for this." "You deserve to be celebrated," Willa said. "You are a good man, Zachary Pierce, the best man I know." They stood together, watching their family and friends celebrate, and Zachary reflected on how different his life might have been if Willa had not ridden up to his ranch that hot July day 22 years ago. He would probably still be alone, going through the motions of living without really embracing life. But she had changed everything, and he would be forever grateful. As the sun began to set, and the party wound down, Zachary and Willa walked hand in hand to the fence line, looking out over the land they had worked together for more than 2 decades. The ranch had grown and changed, but it was still home, still the place where they had built their life together. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we met?" Willa asked softly. "When I asked why you were being so kind to me." Zachary thought back to that day, to the frightened, hurting woman who had stumbled into his life. "I said I knew what it was like to be alone, and that you had probably had enough unkindness to last a lifetime." "You were right," Willa said, "but you gave me more kindness than I could have ever imagined. You gave me a home, a family, a life worth living. You gave me everything." "You gave me just as much," Zachary insisted. "You gave me purpose and joy. You taught me that it was okay to open my heart again, to let someone in. You saved me, Willa." "We saved each other." Willa repeated the words she had spoken years ago, and they were no less true now. "And we have built something beautiful together." As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast Montana sky, they walked back to the house, their hands still clasped, their steps in perfect synchronization after years of walking side by side. Inside, their children and grandchildren were cleaning up from the party, and the house was full of warmth and laughter. This was the life Zachary had never dared to dream of during those lonely years after his parents died. This was the happiness Willa never thought she would find after surviving the nightmare of her first marriage. Together, they had created something precious and lasting, built on a foundation of trust and understanding and deep, abiding love. Years continued to pass, as they always do. Zachary's hair turned completely gray, and his back sometimes ached from decades of hard work. Willa's hands developed arthritis, making it harder for her to do the intricate work with horses that she loved. But they adapted and adjusted, finding new ways to contribute to the ranch and new joys in watching their children and grandchildren take over more of the daily operations. Samuel ran the cattle operation now, with Jacob working alongside him. Grace had turned the horse breeding program into one of the most respected in the territory, which had become a state in 1889. They had even started getting orders from back east, people willing to pay premium prices for horses bred by Willa and Grace Pierce. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children had gone to their own homes, Zachary and Willa would sit on the porch just as they had done for decades, watching the sunset and talking about their day. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, no words needed after so many years together. Other times, they reminisced about the early days of their relationship, laughing about the awkward courting period and the nervous excitement of those first months. "You know what I think about sometimes," Willa said one evening as they rocked gently in their chairs. "I think about how close I came to riding past this ranch instead of stopping. I was so tired and scared, and part of me just wanted to keep going, to put more distance between myself and my old life." "What made you stop?" Zachary asked, even though he had heard this story before. He never tired of hearing it. "I saw you standing on the porch," Willa said, "and something about the way you looked about this place just felt safe, like maybe I could rest here. I did not know then that I would stay forever, but some part of me recognized that this was where I needed to be." "I am glad you listened to that part," Zachary said, reaching over to take her hand. "I am glad you stopped." "Me too," Willa said softly. "Every single day I am glad." They celebrated their 30th anniversary with another gathering, smaller this time, just family. Their children gave speeches about what their parents had taught them about love and commitment. Grace, in particular, spoke movingly about how her mother's strength in the face of past trauma had inspired her to be brave in her own life. "Mom taught me that your past does not have to define your future," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "That you can survive terrible things and still build a beautiful life. That scars, whether visible or not, are not something to be ashamed of. They are proof that you survived, that you kept going even when it was hard." Willa was crying too, and Zachary pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her silver hair. He was so proud of the woman she had become, of how she had taken her pain and transformed it into wisdom that she passed on to their children. She could have let her past make her bitter and closed off, but instead, she had chosen to love openly and deeply, to build rather than destroy. When Zachary turned 65, he officially retired from the day-to-day running of the ranch, turning over full control to Samuel. It was hard at first, stepping back from work that had defined his life for decades. But Willa helped him find new purpose, and they started traveling, something they had never really done before. They visited Martha, who lived in Billings with her daughter now, her husband having passed a few years earlier. They took a train to Denver to see what a big city looked like. They even made a trip to Kansas, so Willa could visit her mother's grave and make peace with her past. Standing in that Kansas cemetery, looking down at the simple headstone, Willa cried for the girl she had been, the girl who had lost her mother too young and married the wrong man too soon. But she also felt a sense of closure, a final letting go of the pain that had haunted her for so long. "I wish she could have known you," Willa said to Zachary as they walked back to their hotel. "I wish she could have seen the life I built, the man I married, the children I raised. I think she would have been proud." "I know she would have been," Zachary said firmly. "You are an extraordinary woman, Willa. Your mother would have been proud of everything you have become." Back at the ranch, life continued its steady rhythm. Grandchildren became teenagers, then adults. Great-grandchildren were born. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management, and the Pierce family name became synonymous with quality and integrity throughout Montana. On their 40th anniversary, Zachary woke early and lay in bed watching Willa sleep. She was 66 now, her face deeply lined, her hair completely white. But to him, she was as beautiful as she had been the day she rode up to his ranch. More beautiful even because now he knew every inch of her, inside and out. He knew her fears and her dreams, her strengths and her vulnerabilities. He had watched her grow and change and become even more remarkable with each passing year. Willa's eyes opened, and she smiled when she saw him watching her. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning, my love," Zachary replied. "Happy anniversary." 40 years, Willa marveled, reaching out to touch his face. "How did that happen so fast? I do not know," Zachary admitted, "but I would do them all over again in a heartbeat." They spent the day quietly, just the two of them, revisiting all the places that were significant to their relationship. The spot where they first kissed, the meadow where he proposed, or rather where she proposed to him, which always made them both smile, the church where they got married, and finally, the porch of their home, where they had spent countless evenings together. "You know what I realized," Willa said as they sat in their rocking chairs, watching another Montana sunset. "I spent 6 years in a marriage where I was afraid every single day. And I have spent 40 years in a marriage where I have felt safe and loved every single day. That is a pretty good trade." Zachary felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I wish you had not had to go through those 6 years at all. I wish I could have found you sooner, saved you from that pain. But then I would not have appreciated what we have," Willa said wisely. "I would not have known how precious it is to have a partner who treats you with kindness and respect. The darkness makes the light shine brighter, Zachary. I would not trade our life together for anything, but I also would not erase my past, because it is what brought me to you." They sat in silence for a while, holding hands, their rocking chairs moving in gentle synchronization. Zachary thought about all the years they had shared, all the moments big and small that had woven together to create a life. It had not always been easy. They had faced challenges and sorrows along the way, but they had faced them together, and that had made all the difference. As the years continued to pass, age caught up with them both. Zachary's heart started giving him trouble, and Willa developed a persistent cough that worried their children. But they took care of each other, just as they always had, facing these new challenges with the same partnership that had seen them through everything else. On a cool October morning, when Zachary was 71 and Willa was 70, they were sitting on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The leaves on the cottonwood trees were turning gold, and there was a crispness in the air that spoke of winter coming. "I love this time of year," Willa said, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Everything is so beautiful." "You are beautiful," Zachary said, as he had told her countless times over the years. Willa laughed. "I am an old woman, Zachary. You are my wife," he corrected. "And you will always be beautiful to me." They sat together, watching the sun rise higher, and Zachary felt a deep contentment settle over him. He had lived a good life, a full life. He had loved and been loved, had built something lasting, had raised children who made him proud. And it had all started with a scared, hurting woman riding up to his ranch, asking for help. "Thank you," he said suddenly. Willa turned to look at him, puzzled. "For what?" "For riding up to my ranch that day," Zachary said. "For taking a chance on a lonely rancher who did not ask questions. For giving me the best 42 years of my life." "Thank you," Willa replied, tears glistening in her eyes. "For loving me when I did not think I could be loved. For showing me what a marriage should be. For giving me a family and a home and a life worth living." They leaned together, foreheads touching, hands clasped between them. And in that moment, with the Montana sun warming their faces and decades of love binding their hearts, they were complete. Two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful together, who had proven that love, real love, could heal even the deepest wounds. The story of Zachary and Willa Pierce became something of a legend in Benton, passed down through generations as an example of true love and second chances. People spoke of the woman who showed up with scars she would not speak of, and the lonely rancher who loved her without asking questions. They spoke of how two broken people had found wholeness in each other, how kindness and patience had triumphed over pain and fear. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Montana mountains in shades of gold and pink, you could still see them sitting on their porch, an elderly couple rocking gently in their chairs, hands clasped together. Their love as strong and steady as it had been on the day they first spoke their vows. They had weathered every storm together, and they would continue to do so until the very end, a testament to the enduring power of love that asks no questions and accepts no limits. Their great-grandchildren would sit at their feet, listening to stories of the old days, of how the ranch came to be, of the hard work and determination that built their family legacy. But the story they loved best was the one about how their great-grandmother rode up to the ranch one hot July day, how their great-grandfather helped her down from her horse and gave her water without asking where she came from or why she was running, how he loved her scars and all, and how that love had changed both their lives forever. It was a story about redemption and healing, about finding light in darkness and hope in despair. It was a story about the transformative power of unconditional love, about how one person's kindness could change another person's entire world. And it was a story that would be told for generations to come, inspiring others to lead with compassion, to love without judgment, to give people the space they need to heal while also offering a steady hand to hold on to. As Zachary and Willa entered their final years, they faced the prospect of death with the same partnership they had brought to everything else in life. They spoke openly about their wishes, about wanting to be buried side by side, about the legacy they hoped to leave their children and grandchildren. They wrote letters to each family member, sharing wisdom and love, making sure everyone knew how much they were treasured. Zachary passed away first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, with Willa holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," and Willa had whispered the same words back, even as her heart was breaking. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, a testament to the impact he had made on his community, and the respect he had earned over a lifetime of hard work and integrity. Willa lived for 2 more years, surrounded by her loving family, still helping where she could but mostly enjoying her great-grandchildren and the life that continued to flourish around her. She spoke often of Zachary, keeping his memory alive with stories and laughter. And when she finally passed, also peacefully, also in her sleep, her children said she had a smile on her face, as if she was seeing something beautiful. They buried her next to Zachary as she had wished, and on their shared headstone the family inscribed these simple words: Zachary and Willa Pierce. He loved her without asking questions. She taught him the meaning of courage. Together they built a life of love. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation that Zachary and Willa had built. And every July, on the anniversary of the day Willa first rode up to the ranch, the family would gather for a celebration, toasting the woman who had been brave enough to ask for help, and the man who had been kind enough to give it without conditions. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the Montana frontier, a tale of 2 people who found each other when they needed it most and built something that would last long after they were gone. It was proof that love could heal, that second chances existed, that sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was simply to accept them as they were and give them the space to become who they were meant to be. And so the legend of the scarred woman and the lonely rancher lived on, passed down through stories and songs, inspiring generation after generation to love boldly, to give generously, to ask no questions when someone needed help, and to remember that everyone carries scars, whether visible or not, and everyone deserves a chance to heal and to love and to be loved in return.